In the sterile blue-lit confines of the Pentagon Situation Room, the air is thick with the scent of ozone and unuttered anxiety. On the primary tactical display, a massive blue icon, the USS Abraham Lincoln, is inching away from the South China Sea. To a casual observer, it is a routine redeployment. To a strategic analyst, it is a calculated risk that borders on madness. We are witnessing the Great Void, a moment in 2026 where the Pacific, the most volatile chessboard on the planet, appears to be left unguarded. But modern warfare is rarely what it appears to be on a two-dimensional map. The departure of 100,000 tons of nuclear-powered steel is not a retreat. It is a displacement. It is the clearing of the stage for a different kind of predator, one that does not announce its arrival with the thunder of a 1,000-man crew, but with the chilling silence of a ghost. The mathematics of this maneuver are cold. The Middle East is a powder keg with a shortened fuse. Ballistic missile threats against the Straits of Hormuz have reached a terminal velocity that diplomacy can no longer decelerate. The Lincoln, with its specific wing of F-35C, Lightning II's the heavyweights of the sky, was the only tool calibrated for that specific lock. Its long-range strike capabilities were required to reach deep into hostile territory beyond the reach of conventional land-based assets. And so the sledgehammer was moved to where the wall was thickest. This left a vacuum in the east. A power vacuum is a dangerous thing. It invites ambition. Our competitors look at the empty waters where the Lincoln once stood and see an opportunity. They see the withdrawal of the ultimate deterrent. They see a gap in the armor, but they have made a fatal error in their calculations. They are measuring power in tonnage and visible presence. They are thinking in the 20th century, while the United States Navy has already moved into the 21st. Emerging from the grey mists of the Philippine Sea is the USS Tripoli, LHA-7. To the untrained eye, the Tripoli is a desperate downgrade. It is half the size of the giant it replaces. It lacks the nuclear heart of a Nimitz-class carrier. It has no steam catapults to hurl heavy bombers into the sky. It is by traditional metrics an amphibious assault ship, a taxi for marines and their gear. However, the Tripoli is alive. Engineers at Huntington Ingalls Industries did something radical with this vessel. They gutted the traditional well deck, the very feature that defines an amphibious ship. They sacrificed 2/3 of the medical facilities. They stripped away the fat of a multi-mission ship to create something singular, something lean, and something terrifyingly focused. They turned a transport ship into a lightning carrier. This is an evolution of lethality. The Tripoli does not carry hovercraft or swimming tanks, it carries fuel. By removing the well deck, the internal volume was repurposed to double its capacity for JP-5 aviation fuel. It is no longer a ship, it is a floating high-octane magazine. It is optimized for one variable sortie rate. It is designed to keep a constant, unrelenting cycle of stealth fighters in the air, creating a persistent umbrella of invisibility over contested waters. But this engineering marvel faced a brutal enemy before it ever saw a battlefield thermodynamics. The F-35B, the short takeoff and vertical landing STOVL variant that calls the Tripoli home is a beast of fire. When it comes in for a vertical landing, its F-135 engine directs a pillar of exhaust downward that reaches over 1,700 degrees Fahrenheit. This is not just heat, it is a blowtorch. Standard non-skid deck paint, the kind used on every other ship in the fleet, fails at 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Under the F-35B, that paint doesn't just peel, it vaporizes. The resulting debris can be sucked into the engine, causing catastrophic failure while the steel of the deck itself begins to warp like paper in a flame. The solution was a technology born from the aerospace sector, thermal spray, non-skid. It isn't paint at all. It is a metallic matrix, an aluminum titanium alloy, fused directly onto the steel deck using high-velocity ionized gas. This creates a surface that doesn't just resist heat, it manages it. It dissipates the thermal load across the vast surface of the ship, allowing the Tripoli to withstand the repeated searing landings of a full squadron of stealth jets. The Lincoln was a show of force, a massive undeniable statement of American presence. The Tripoli is a siege engine. It is smaller, harder to find, and significantly more difficult to hit with the hypersonic carrier-killer missiles that our adversaries have spent decades perfecting. A supercarrier is a target too big to hide and too expensive to lose. The Tripoli, however, is the switchblade. It is agile, it is concealed, and it is lethal at close range. Yet as we look deeper into the math of this swap, we find a disturbing discrepancy. The F-35B on the Tripoli is not the F-35C from the Lincoln. To achieve the miracle of vertical flight, the B variant carries a massive lift fan behind the pilot. That fan, generating 29,000 shaft horsepower, occupies vital space. It shrinks the fuel tanks and, more importantly, it shrinks the weapon bay. On the Lincoln, the C variant carries the 2,000-pound GBU 31 bunker buster, a weapon designed to delete command centers buried under 30 feet of concrete. That bomb is 152 inches long. The weapon bay of the F-35B is exactly 140 inches long. 12 inches, a mere foot of steel, and physics separates the Tripoli from the heavy hitting power of its predecessor. The F-35B is forced to carry the 1,000-pound GBU-32. On paper, we have swapped a sledgehammer for a dagger. We have accepted a shorter combat radius and a lighter punch. But in the geography of the first island chain, where every rock and atoll is a potential base, the dagger is more dangerous than the hammer. The Lincoln requires a massive deep-water port or a vast expanse of open ocean to maneuver. It is a lighthouse in a dark sea. The Tripoli and the aircraft it carries operate on a different philosophy dispersion. The F-35B doesn't need a pristine 1,000-foot deck to survive. It can land on a bombed-out stretch of highway on a remote island. It can refuel from a hidden cache on a coral atoll. While the enemy searches the horizon for the silhouette of a supercarrier, the Tripoli's fleet has already vanished into the geography of the Pacific. This brings us to the most controversial element of the 2026 budget, a helicopter that costs $147.8 million per unit, the CH-53K King Stallion. To the taxpayer, this price tag is an insult. It is more expensive than the stealth fighter it supports. But to the military planner, the King Stallion is the connective tissue of the Great Void. This machine is a brute. With 22,500 horsepower, it can lift 36,000 pounds in pitch-black darkness. It doesn't carry troops, it carries the Nemesis system, a robotic truck armed with naval strike missiles. The strategy is simple but terrifying. The King Stallion drops a Nemesis truck on a barren rock and then it vanishes. The truck sits silent, invisible to radar, until an enemy fleet passes by. Then the rock wakes up and fires. By the time the enemy realizes they are under attack, the truck is gone, picked up by its $147 million Uber and moved to a new anonymous island. The Tripoli is not fighting a war of attrition, it is conducting a surgical operation across thousands of miles of ocean. But there is a flaw, a fatal silent variable that the Lincoln took with her when she sailed for the Persian Gulf. The Tripoli is blind. When the USS Abraham Lincoln vanished over the horizon, she didn't just take her strike power, she took the eyes of the fleet. The E-2, the advanced Hawkeye with its massive rotating radar dome, is the only asset capable of seeing over the curvature of the Earth to detect low-flying cruise missiles or stealthy surface combatants from hundreds of miles away. The Tripoli, for all its structural ingenuity, cannot launch the Hawkeye. It lacks the catapults and the deck length. Without that high-altitude radar, the Tripoli is trapped by the horizon problem. In the high-speed world of 2026, if an enemy missile breaks the horizon line, you have seconds, not minutes to leave. This is the vulnerability that analysts in the East are counting on. They believe that by removing the Hawkeye, the US Navy has effectively blinded its Pacific presence. But the Pentagon isn't gambling on luck. It is betting on a digital architecture known as NIFC, a Naval Integrated Fire Control, Counter-Air. To understand why the Tripoli can survive in a blind environment, you have to look at the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers sailing in her wake, specifically ships like the USS Rafael Peralta. Imagine a scenario in the Philippine Sea. An F-35B from the Tripoli is flying 200 miles ahead of the group. Its pilot has turned off the main radar. To emit energy is to scream your location to every listener in the theater. Instead, the jet stays dark, using its AN/ASQ-239 passive sensors to sniff the air. It detects a faint rhythmic electronic pulse, the heartbeat of an enemy corvette hiding behind a distant island. The F-35B doesn't engage. It doesn't have the heavy ordnance for a kill. Instead, it speaks MADL, Multifunction Advanced Data Link, a narrow-beam stealthy digital language that is nearly impossible to intercept. The jet beams the exact coordinates of the enemy back to the fleet. But there is an engineering nightmare. The F-35 speaks stealth while the destroyers speak edges. They are digitally incompatible. To bridge this, the Navy uses a gateway node, a translator in the sky that converts the F-35's whisper into fire control quality data for the destroyer. On the bridge of the Rafael Peralta, the radar screens are empty. The ship's own sensors see nothing but waves, but the fire control computer sees a ghost track provided by the F-35. The captain authorizes a launch on remote. A SM-6 missile roars out of the vertical launch tail. It climbs to the edge of the atmosphere, flying blind, guided solely by the math sent from a jet it cannot see toward a target it cannot find. As the missile begins its terminal dive at several times the speed of sound, the enemy ship is still scanning the horizon for a radar lock that will never come. They never hear the ping, they never see the shooter, they simply cease to exist. This is the invisible network. The Tripoli doesn't need to be a fortress, because it is the quarterback of a killing whale. It transforms the ocean from a battlefield of steel into a battlefield of data. However, data requires a conduit, and in the Pacific, that conduit is the logistics of the small and the many. This is where the CH-53K King Stallion justifies its $147 million price tag. Its role is to ensure that the network remains mobile and unpredictable. If the enemy successfully targets one island node, the King Stallion ensures that 3 more have already been established under the cover of night. The engineering of the King Stallion had to overcome a phenomenon that nearly killed the program exhaust, gas reingestion EGR. Because the helicopter is so powerful, the downwash from its massive rotors was forcing its own hot exhaust back into the engine intakes during a hover. The engines were literally choking on their own breath. The fix required billions in aerodynamic redesign, but the result is a machine that allows the US Navy to treat the entire Pacific like a giant modular base. You cannot clear the Pacific of American influence because you can no longer find where that influence starts or ends. The Lincoln was a target you could track from space. The Tripoli's network is 1,000 flickering lights, any one of which can turn into a lethal strike in seconds. The Great Void of 2026 is a strategic trap. The departure of the Lincoln was the bait. It invited our adversaries to step into the kill zone, thinking the guard was gone. But as they move into the vacuum, they are finding that the locks have been changed. The sledgehammer is gone, but the air is now filled with invisible switchblades. The math has been recalculated. The shift from concentrated power to distributed lethality is complete. The question is no longer whether we can defend the Pacific without a supercarrier. The question is how does an enemy fight a ghost that has 10,000 eyes? As the dust settles on the tactical map, we are left to contemplate the haunting silence of the 2026 Pacific. The Great Void is no longer a vacuum. It is a haunted house where the walls have ears and the shadows carry stings. The swap is complete. The heavy, predictable rhythm of a nuclear carrier has been replaced by the erratic, terrifying pulse of the lightning carrier. But we must look beyond the steel and the software to the human variable in this equation. Behind every $147 million helicopter, behind every metallic shielded deck, there is a commander making a choice. In the Middle East, the Lincoln represents the weight of history, a massive visible deterrent meant to prevent a war through sheer presence. In the Pacific, the Tripoli represents the future, a cold, calculated admission that the age of invulnerability is over. We have entered an era where being seen is synonymous with being destroyed. The US Navy's gamble is that invisibility and dispersion are more valuable than 10 acres of sovereign American territory floating on the waves. It is a transition from the poetry of power to the prose of survival. This evolution brings us to a fundamental crossroads in the history of warfare. For over 80 years, the supercarrier has been the undisputed king of the sea. It was the ultimate symbol of national will. But as the Tripoli operates in the shadow of the Lincoln's departure, we are forced to ask if the crown is sleeping. When a $150 million helicopter and a robotic truck can replicate the lethality of a 100,000-ton behemoth, the very definition of a superpower begins to shift. Physics is an unforgiving judge. It dictated that the Lincoln must go where the range was needed. It dictated that the Tripoli must stay where agility was required. And American engineering, relentless and adaptive, found a way to bridge the gap between what we have and what we need. The Pacific is not empty. It is waiting. The sensors are active, the data links are humming, and the ghosts are in position. To the analysts watching from the east, do not mistake the silence for peace. The locks have been changed, the trap is set, and the math is final. As warfare evolves from heavy steel to invisible data, do you believe the era of the supercarrier is ending? Or will the giants always be the kings of the sea? Let us know your analysis. The watch is set. Briefing concluded.